Now, the SNP have launched their manifesto today in Edinburgh. The First Minister, John Swinney, did the introduction. Let's listen to part of what he had to say.
We will join with progressive politicians south of the border to press for greater funding for the NHS and for the UK Government to match the pay deals that we've given our health staff in Scotland. That would see an extra £1.6 billion for the National Health Service in Scotland. And we would introduce a Keep the NHS in Public Hands bill at Westminster, a legal guarantee for a publicly owned, publicly operated health service. The SNP message on the health service is clear. It is simple and it will never change. The NHS is not for sale.
That was John Swinney. We can talk to Stephen Flynn, who is the leader of the SNP at Westminster. Hello to you, Stephen. Who is trying to sell the NHS?
Hi, Joe. How are you doing? It's been a wee while. Of course, those comments relate directly to comments made by Wes Streeting, Labour's incoming likely health secretary.
Oh yeah, which comments are those? Where does he say he's wanting to privatise the NHS?
If you allow me the opportunity to finish, he was very clear about the fact that he wants to invite the private sector into the NHS, but to even go beyond just hospitals as well. That's not good enough. We can't allow that to happen. But beyond stopping privatisation, what we need to see is investment in our health service, because it is being starved of investment by the Tories. We've got £18 billion worth of public sector cuts that have been baked in by the Tories, which the Labour Party are going to accept. We reject that. We think there needs to be more money going into our health service to meet the needs of the people of Scotland and indeed people right across these isles. That's a positive vision in stark contrast to the status quo cuts consensus that's coming from the two major Westminster parties.
Let's talk about investment in just a moment. I want to focus on this idea that you are introducing a bill. You want Westminster to legally enshrine the idea of the NHS in public hands. Which of the main parties are pledging to privatise the NHS, Stephen Flynn? Privatisation means that they are going to start charging people for access to the National Health Service. Which party's doing that?
It also means making sure that we do not have a situation where we are inviting the private sector to operate the health service.
No, they're two different things. Private outsourcing.
Now, that is quite clearly what
Stephen, they are two different things.
I'm sorry, the two are very much interlinked. The two are very much interlinked, because if you get to a point where you overly invite the private sector and you lose that public status that it has, and what Wes Streeting has sought to do through his own comments is to invite the private sector in and to go beyond just hospitals themselves. Now, we know the bizarre plans of Nigel Farage, who'd be quite happy to get rid of the NHS. We know that the NHS is never safe in the Conservative Party's hands.
I'm talking about the Conservatives, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats.
But Joe, of course, if the Labour Party agree that the NHS should be kept in public hands, that it shouldn't be outsourced or people shouldn't be charged for accessing the NHS, then all they've got to do is back our bill. And it strikes me as quite concerning that the Labour Party response to this has been anger rather than simply saying we agree, we think the NHS should remain in public hands. And I would suggest that that's because of the comments of Wes Streeting and the fact that the Labour Party are accepting these £18 billion worth of public sector cuts.
As I say, we'll come to the cuts in just a moment, as you have outlined there. But Nick Thomas-Symonds is here in the studio. Do you want to actually outline what Labour is proposing? There is concern about increasing private sector involvement. There's been private sector involvement for some time, since Tony Blair's time. But are you on a slippery slope to allowing so much private sector involvement in the NHS that it will change the nature of the health service?
No, and there have been private beds in the NHS since it was created by Aneurin Bevan in 1948. I mean, this argument that somehow Labour wants to privatise the NHS, Wes Streeting has said over his dead body, absolutely not. What we have said, and I think we should absolutely do, is of course we will use spare private sector capacity to bring down waiting lists. And I couldn't look the people that I'm standing before for election in the eye and say, if there is an empty bed in a nearby private hospital that could be used to bring the waiting list down, why on earth wouldn't you do that? That is entirely sensible, but it's also entirely consistent with the founding principles of the NHS.
Stephen?
Well, if Nick is of that view and he's so confident of that view, what he can do today is state that his party would back our bill to keep the NHS in public hands. And what he could do beyond that is say that he will not back the £18 billion worth of public sector cuts that the Labour Party are accepting from the Tories, which the IFS call a conspiracy of silence, because that's going to have a detrimental impact upon our health service and our ability to meet the needs of individuals. Those are the easy propositions which he could agree to right now.
Nick?
I don't need to back an SNP bill to show my commitment to the NHS, not at all. And in respect of the second point that Stephen is making, there will be an immediate cash injection into the National Health Service if we get a Labour government at Westminster. We will fund it by closing the loopholes in the Conservatives' non-DOMS policy. The people who live here should pay their taxes here. And secondly, by closing the gap with people who are not paying their taxes. Now, in England, that will pay for an additional 40,000 appointments a week. And as Stephen knows, there will be Barnett consequences of that going to Scotland. I'm sure he will welcome, on the basis of what he's just said, that additional investment to Scotland if we are going to be able to secure that Labour government. But I would urge people in Scotland to vote Scottish Labour for change. We've had 17 years of Stephen's party in power in Scotland, 14 years of the Conservatives. If you want to send a government to Westminster from Scotland, vote Scottish Labour.
Right. I mean, in terms of the way you, the SNP, run health services in Scotland, because it is devolved to Scotland, you're asking for more money and more investment when your record, according to your critics, is lamentable. Here is the BBC News headline: NHS Scotland waiting lists hit record high. Why do you deserve more money from Westminster when you are mismanaging health services and have done so in your record in government already?
Sorry, Joe, I would reject that assertion wholeheartedly.
Which what? The waiting list hit record high?
Taxation in Scotland, which is hold on a second, which has raised an additional £1.5 billion, has put record investment into our health service. We have extreme challenges in our health service, but they have the best performing A&Es anywhere on these isles. We haven't had a single day, one single day of junior doctor strikes in Scotland, in stark contrast to what's been the case elsewhere in these isles. We've not had a single day of nurses strikes, a single day of paramedic strikes, in stark contrast to what's been elsewhere. We are seeking to invest and protect our NHS so that we can deal with the challenges that have resulted as a result of austerity from the UK government, austerity which the Labour Party will continue with these £18 billion of cuts, and of course as a result of Brexit, which has dramatically impacted our workforce, particularly in our care sector, which means that we have a backlog where we can't get people into the care sector. Decisions taken in London which have directly impacted Scotland's health service. We are doing everything we possibly can to protect it, but we need more, which is why we reject the austerity agenda which the Labour Party accepts from the Conservatives.
But Stephen, if you've been doing such a good job in terms of running the health service in Scotland, why is it that the number of people in Scotland paying to go private because they are fed up of sitting on what long waiting lists has gone up from 19,000 in 2022 to 21,000 in 2023?
For the exact same reasons that there are backlogs in Wales and in England because of the pandemic. We know that that is the case, and what we need to see in order to counter that, in order to change that, is investment, which is why today we're saying that we want another £16 billion of NHS spending from the UK government, so that's £1.6 billion more coming to Scotland so that we can do more in order to bring those waiting lists down. But when it comes to our NHS, as I said, we've had a record funding, we have challenges, but we still have the best performing health service in pretty much every metric on these isles, and that's
not every metric, clearly, because I've just read you the waiting list.
Of course, as is the case, I said almost every metric. As is the case in Wales, where the NHS is on its knees under Labour's control. There's a stark difference, and it wasn't me, by the way. If I want to talk about West Streeting, as we did earlier, West Streeting said that all roads lead back to Westminster when it comes to the NHS in Wales. Why is it different in Scotland? I'm sure Nick
well, let's
can
put that to
clarify
Damien. I mean, there has been a period of austerity, says Stephen Flynn. They need more money to invest in the health services that they run.
So, look, all roads don't lead back to Westminster, as Stephen well knows. I mean, listening to the bit of Mr Swinney earlier that we were able to, and he was saying that, you know, a vote for the SNP would trigger another independence referendum. I wonder what for the SNP doesn't trigger another independence referendum. But with the powers that they already have, which are very substantial, running health, running education, I'd love to talk about that, by the way, if we have time, then they seem to dodge what the outcomes of those things are. You also, Stephen, have substantial tax-raising powers. If you want to, if you want more money to go into the exchequer, then you have the ability to do that. So stop looking to everybody else for what's wrong and start fixing your own house with the very, very substantial powers, including revenue-raising powers, that you have.
Stephen?
So we have raised £1.5 billion, as I said earlier, to go into our public sector. But I'm a little bit astonished.
So that proves it's possible to raise revenue.
We've had 14 years of austerity. We've had, well, as we have just did, and if the UK government replicated that, then we would have an additional £15 billion into the UK Treasury, which would allow us to spend more money on the health service, which would be able to resolve some of the issues which your party has caused. But the reality is we've had 14 years of austerity, but we've also had Brexit. And Brexit has taken £40 billion out of the Treasury. £40 billion worth of tax receipts out of the Treasury. The consequence of that is huge, and those decisions have been taken at Westminster and imposed upon the people of Scotland. We reject that. We believe we should be rejoining the single market, in stark contrast to the same language from the Labour Party and the Tory Party that Brexit has to be accepted. It doesn't have to be accepted. There is a better future on offer. There is a more hopeful future on offer, but that only happens if people vote for the Scottish National Party.
Stephen, just before I let you go, taking a breath from politics, will you be watching the football tonight?
I will be watching the football tonight. I hope you will be too.
I will be. Absolutely, I will be. Against Switzerland, isn't it? I don't know what time it is. You'll have to tell me. But I think it... What time is it, Stephen? Do you know?
It's 8 o'clock tonight. Yeah.
8 o'clock
It's
tonight.
8 o'clock tonight. I'm a big member of the Tartan Army. I got a notification this morning telling me that my flight was due for my travels out there.
Yeah.
But of course I'm here instead because this is much more important. But I've got absolute confidence Steve Clark and the boys will win tonight.
It's good to know. We can see some of your fans gathering there for that match later on. Thanks very much there, Stephen Flynn.